Aloha! This year, the National Park Service and the United States Public Health Service are celebrating their centennial partnership to protect, promote, and advance health in parks. As part of this celebration, the National Park Service Office of Health and the National Environmental Education Foundation are hosting the second installment of the Power of Parks for Health Roundtable series to discuss increasing visibility, representation, and relevancy of Asian American Pacific Islander communities in the outdoors. Please note that this webinar will be recorded. I'm your moderator, Jin Praxawan, Chief of Interpretation at Haleakala National Park. I am joined by panelists, Hanako Wasaki, Superintendent of Honouliuli National Historic Site located on the island of Oahu. She is a public historian by trade and enjoys creating public programs. Christopher Chow, park guide at Haleakala National Park located on the island of Maui. Christopher was born and raised in Hana on the island of Maui. He attended Kamehameha schools and earned his degree from the University of Hawaii, Hilo, in geography, with an emphasis on environmental studies, as well as 2 minors in Hawaiian studies and anthropology. We're also joined by Captain Joy Lee, a pharmacist with the United States Public Health Service. She cherishes the power of parks and the outdoors for their benefits to health, which cannot be replaced by medication. I'm Bibi Nguyen, Director of Communications at the Reston Community Center of Fairfax County in Virginia. Bibi is also serving as the Fairfax County's Equity Ambassador and Equity Lead in her agency. Mrs. Nguyen holds a master's in Public Administration from George Mason University and a Bachelor of Arts in International Affairs from Georgetown University. Unfortunately, our last panelist, Ambreen Tariq, is unable to join us today, but we will share some great resources that Ambreen has sent in. Before I get started with our discussion today, I have a few ground rules to cover, specifically for our audience and our panelists. Today, this platform is used to generate discussion. We may face some tough questions, and our panelists may share experiences that are strikingly different from your own opinions, experiences, or knowledge. Keep an open mind and remember our panelists are sharing their personal experiences and knowledge. Next, be respectful. Although you may not be sharing, mind your comments in the chat. Hate speech and disrespectful language will not be tolerated and may result in your removal. And follow up. We have a lot to cover and only 90 minutes to share. Unfortunately, we may not have time to get to your specific question. We will follow up with you by email with a list of resources and a recording of this webinar. For those of you who shared with us what you hope to learn or gain from this discussion, some of the trending questions that we received were, if I'm not from the Asian American Pacific Islander community, how can I understand or be supportive? What's a way to be a better ally? We plan to answer some of these questions and the requests in our discussion to follow, so please stay tuned. Today, our discussion revolves around health and parks. I'd like to invite our panelists and audience members to use the chat to explore the following question. In 1 to 2 words, what does your health and the outdoors look or feel like to you? In 1 to 2 words, what does your health and outdoors look or feel like to you? Hey, I see a lot of great responses: peace, clean air, liberating, gardening, uncharted, healing, serenity. So many great answers and so many great inspirational things that you all are writing about what health and parks means to you. I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question for my panelists here. How did you all get involved in parks, or who or what inspired you?
This is Joy. I can start. Well, my father was a forestry professor, and each summer he had a conference to attend, and it was usually in a place with a lot of forests, and that was often near a national park. So that was my earliest experience every summer, getting to pile in the car and go with my family to a national park or to a national forest or some outdoors area. It was just wonderful memories, and still I consider the ultimate vacation or ultimate recreational opportunity. Someone else should go.
Sorry.
Please go, Hanako. I was just going to say someone else should go.
Oh, okay. So I guess my introduction or connection to parks was, it's not like other folks where I was in an urban area near an urban park or, near a natural resource site or something like that. I was in college, and the former dean of my college that I was at asked me to join a board meeting. And I don't know if many people join small boards, but that was the first board meeting I ever attended, got voted on as vice chair, and it happened to be for the Friends of Minidoka. So that's how I got engaged with Minidoka National Historic Site, because I just happened to go in. Yeah.
I'll go next. My experience is a little odd, because my first real exposure to sort of like the ocean and mountains and things like that was actually when I was in a refugee camp in Malaysia. And I felt, even though I really didn't have a full understanding of why I was there, I loved the freedom of, like, just overlooking the ocean and just hiking and running all over the place, and having feeling the freedom to do that. Because before that, I was in Ho Chi Minh City, and it was very city, narrow alleys and small streets. So I don't think I was ever exposed to any kind of open, vista like that before. But I really fell into the parks and outdoors was about 7 years ago, when I attended my cousin's wedding in the Pacific Northwest at Silver Falls State Park in Oregon. And the scenic beauty, and I hiked the Trail of 10 Falls there, and I've been chasing waterfalls and national parks ever since. So thank you.
I just have a follow-up question. So you said it was a wedding, that really got you chasing waterfalls after that. Did you know going in that you would be doing a lot of things outdoors for that wedding, or?
Not, I even considered, why did I go to this wedding? Because I didn't know, Oregon was not on the map for me. Their scenic beauty was not something that I was aware of. So I wasn't at all outdoorsy. As a matter of fact, most of my colleagues nicknamed me Granola Girl after that wedding, because I went from like suits and heels into athletic and hiking gear after that. And so it was almost like night and day after I discovered the outdoors.
And I think
I'm. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Aloha. My name is Chris, and yeah, so the first time I got involved with the National Park Service was in 2018. I served as a team leader for a conservation summer program we have here in Hawaii. It's called Kupu Hawaii, and it's like a HYCC conservation thing where we just basically go around to different agencies and we work. It's a lot of just physical work. So I worked with the trail crew for several weeks. And then that was kind of like my first exposure to the park. And what inspired me was basically people's admiration for the park, especially here at Haleakala. We have something called, in Hawaiian culture, we have something called Vahipana. And Vahipana can be like celebrated places or legendary places. And so Haleakala really served as that kind of place for myself, and along with many other people here in Maui. So yeah.
Thank you, Chris. So Bibi, access to the outdoors appears to be now a very integral part of your life, and it sounds like you even have some nicknames because of that. What are some barriers that you had encountered in accessing the outdoors? Because it sounds like it's something that was more recent for you in the past 7 years. And then a follow-up to that is, what's helped you break down some of those barriers?
Wow. I've given this a lot of thought, Jen, and my fellow panelists, and I can, the more I keep kind of posing the question, as I narrow down to why, what are, why has it become such an integral part of my life now, and I honed it down to two key issues, and that's access and representation. And access encompasses for me multiple fronts, such as transportation, economic factors, cultural barriers such as language, the fear of being targeted and attacked in remote places where I may not be able to get help readily. Those are some of those kind of access type of barriers that I know play a huge role. I came from a single parent household, so most of my childhood was with living with family and extended family in multi dwellings. So recreational and access to the parks was like not even in our day-to-day consciousness. The apartment complexes that I grew up in, we're lucky if we even have a kind of safe playground to be in, much less anything of what I know that are available to us now. But when I was growing up, I think as part of members of the AAPI community, and I'm probably revealing my age at this point, the pressure for academic achievement sort of overrides everything else, right? And it was always emphasized to me as the utmost importance and our ticket out of poverty and out of financial hardships and things like that. So all through grade school and even through high school, like outdoor recreation, sports, schools, extracurricular activities, and all of that are very much a luxury, and that we can't afford. So I mean, when I was thinking about this question, I recall, my dad was like a dishwasher at the Whole Gates Hotel downtown in at the waterfront, and he attended school during the day at UDC to learn English, as well as a auto mechanic, certificate to for him to earn a living. So I would remember, I would try to stay up late at night, and he would bring home, those little sticky buns that are probably Joy will know, right? From DC, you probably know those sticky buns from the Whole Gates. But over time, as I grow into adulthood, I seek out the outdoors and parks as a stress reliever for my work. And really, thanks to technology and the internet and social media, I found the courage to join hiking groups and meetups. And I'm pretty tomboyish. So I would do it with people I don't know, and that's one of the things that my family and friends don't even like. They can't fathom, or they can't really understand. But eventually, I stuck with it, and I built a hiking community on my own. And now I have, over probably at any given time, 10, 15, 20 of my female friends hiking with me. And we informally call ourselves the Happy Pants. And we proudly don the happiest pants we can find, just for practical and safety reasons, so that, people can spot us when we're out in remote trails, in the woods. And honestly, I'm so proud of that community that I've built, because in the last 5 to 7 years, I've hiked over 15, 16, I think probably closer to 20 national parks now, and thousands of miles of trails. Havasupai, which is one of my like favorite surreal places, are some of the places that are most memorable. But access, and I think representation is the other key factor. I think that's the barrier. When I frequent, like the most popular of businesses for outdoor recreation, such as REI and you name it, all the popular outdoor businesses, I don't see my face represented in any of the marketing. And I do communications and I do marketing, so I know it's a very conscious decision. And I feel like representation is lacking in terms of the businesses and outdoor activities, and they're predominantly marketing towards a wider audience. So one way that I try to overcome that barrier is to be very visible and very deliberate in my communications, in terms of where I occupy spaces online, social media, Twitter, Instagram, and try to post pictures and locations of where I am, so that over time people kind of gotten to know me as this person who does a lot of outdoors, and they go for me as a resource and knowledge of those types of things. So those are the two key barriers, and some of the ways that I overcome them. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Bibi. You covered a lot of ground there. Some of the economic barriers, family situations can alter and our access in the outdoors, or even comfort in the outdoors. And it sounds like you've done quite a bit to find community and also build community and invite others to feel welcome in those spaces. From our other panelists, was there anything that resonated with you, or have you had a different experience when it comes to barriers, or things that you want to echo that Bibi just shared with us? And if you've had a completely different experience, in accessing the outdoors, would love to hear that too.
Well, one of the things that Bibi shared with me does resonate with me, because it just caused me to think, if my father didn't have a work conference to go to each year in an outdoor space, would we have gone to national parks? And I think it's unlikely, because Bibi is right. In the Asian culture, education is very highly prioritized, and so is work. And so I think these priorities tend to overshadow like recreational or restorative type opportunities. So that was an interesting observation.
So one of the things as we're talking about barriers, our barriers aren't just what we face today, but some have historical context. And working at Minidoka National Historic Site and now Honouliuli, both were former Japanese incarceration sites and reminders of the importance of protecting our civil liberties. Hanako, in your experience, what historical barriers to access have kept people from the AAPI communities from accessing these places?
Okay, hopefully my audio isn't bad. Are we okay? Great. And I could probably touch a little bit on the other stuff. I just didn't want to dominate, because I knew the second question was for me. So historically, like especially when we talk about the Japanese American incarceration, we have to just think about what the government actually, like in retrospect, 40 years later, there was a congressional study that was done that said this was due to race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. So understanding that in the context of the Japanese American incarceration sites helps us kind of understand what are the historical barriers, because back then in 1942, well, actually starting in 1944, Department of Interior actually started to oversee these sites. So it's a little bit complicated when we are literally the agency, or we're part of the agency that oppress a group of people. So sometimes, so my family was incarcerated during World War II. So I had 4 generations of my family at Manzanar National Historic Site. And working at Minidoka, and I also worked at Tule Lake, I ended up finding out, I had family at those sites too. And I had family at Gila. So it was kind of interesting, to grow in my position, finding out I had even more connections to these national historic sites, but then also a little problematic that I'm wearing this badge and it indicates the agency that I currently work for, which actually, oppressed my family, limited the economic gains and that my family could have had all these years, right? So understanding these historical barriers is really important because some people do not trust the government to tell the story, right? Whether it's just focusing on AAPI sites or, maybe sites in the South, there are going to be some conflict there that we as a National Park Service have to look at ourselves in the mirror to understand where we came from, to be able to be more inclusive and to break down these barriers, to try to get other people to want to participate. Because, one of our first experiences, like as a child going to, one of the big parks, we didn't have a good experience. We were supposed to go camping and we literally turned around and went back home. And our family history is that, oh, you remember that one time we camped in our backyard? And it wasn't until I think a year or two ago, I was talking to my sister, because then the story goes where my sister threw up on my brother and then we ended up inside the house. But in reality, we were supposed to actually go camping at a park, but we were not treated well. And I didn't go to a National Park Service site for about 15 years. So we need to understand that how we treat visitors creates that welcoming environment, and we need to do better to understand, how we could do better as a bureau and as an agency. And then also, try to find ways to break down these barriers, whether it's inclusion, people telling the story accurately, because that's what we've been trained to do at Minidoka National Historic Site when I was there. And even within the Japanese American Confinement Sites Network, within the Park Service, we finally institutionalized terminology of how do we tell these stories where we're not using euphemistic governmental terms, but to adequately and accurately describe what happened. So we're not minimalizing people's experiences. And so there's other opportunities within different communities to do that, to create that inclusion, to create that understanding, the cultural competency, to make things a little bit better for folks to actually have an interest to join.
Yeah, the storytelling of our parks sounds really interesting, and the history of our parks, and ongoing history and legacies. Are there experiences that other panelists have, in whether it's learning about parks or telling stories of parks, that you guys want to share, or feel are important, and when it comes to thinking about how we are able to access or feel safe, or even feel heard or seen in parks and outdoor spaces?
I want to add to, I find your story, Hanako, of, fascinating. That's an aspect that I feel like as much as I love the parks, I feel a little inadequate in terms of really fully understanding the context and the history that are in some of these places that I visit. So that's something that I could do better on. But I think one thing that I see that is a thread between Joy's experience and mine, and yours and Christopher's, is that some of these impressions that we have in our formative years in terms of accessing, the outdoors, it stays with us, into adulthood. And so that's something that I think we need to be so deliberate and so conscious about, that we don't, accidentally or inadvertently, turn a whole generation or, entire groups of 9-year-old or 10-year-old just because of something bad that happens to them from ever, wanting to access the parks again. That's just something that I would be devastated. So I just want to add that thread that I see.
And highlighting that experience, Hanako, so you said you were with your entire family when you rolled up to that campsite, and something negative happened, and then 15 years later is when you joined the National Park Service. What was your family's reaction, given all of your family's experience with the federal government, and even just that one experience camping that really turned you all away? What was their reaction?
Well, I think, not trying to be glib, but I was a history major. So they're like, oh, you finally got employed with your degree. I think, so there was that joy. But if we're just focusing on the relationship, you know, I think my family just wanted the amnesia, right? Because it was more merciful to forget about it than to relive it, right? So it's just all like, oh, we're going to just start fresh. But then it's also really strange too, because like another part of my family just put, like, they think that I'm a perpetual intern. It's like, oh, when are you going to get a real job? So it's really interesting. But I think overall, it's like positive to see like, oh, okay, there are spaces for our community to exist. And we could create these special events and programs where within the Japanese American community, you could just be unapologetically Japanese American and, you know, have, you know, culture and everything exists at the site. And then you don't have to like code switch, which is really cool because, you know, this is why I'm so excited to be in Hawaii is like, I don't have to code switch most of the day versus when I was in Idaho and I grew up in Idaho. So I'm always code switching at least what, 20 hours a day or so. So, you know, just being able to find a space within the community, I know like my family's happy for that because I think that they could see that I'm finally kind of in a place that's where I belong versus, you know, try to fit in elsewhere.
Yeah, I love that statement of feeling unapologetically yourself and not needing that, you know, not needing to feel like you need to code switch and change your personality or change your interests or change how you speak or whatever it is that you're doing. Um, you know, and thinking about some of the outdoor spaces or even just places that you feel welcomed in from our rest of our panelists, what are some places that you have felt welcomed in that you could be unapologetically yourself and enjoy, you know, the outdoors or access those places?
Sure, I can start with this question. I definitely am fascinated by Hanako's story and Bibi's story. I have had a very different experience in that my experiences with national parks have been positive. I can't remember like a single negative experience in a national park. In fact, when I see the park ranger uniforms, I get excited because to me, that's a sign of fun and education and just fresh air and uh, just like the ultimate source of recreation. Um, in fact, when I am outdoors, I think I actually think about race and racism and that type of issue less because I am in a space where I feel welcome and I feel like my mind is more free. Um, the most amount of time I've spent in parks has also been with camping or backpacking. And when you are camping or backpacking, your thoughts turn away from issues like money or power because those things are totally irrelevant when you're backpacking or when you're camping, and more to the people that you're with. And it helps me to realize that we all have similar needs. No matter who you have in your backpacking party, they all need water, they all need food, they all need shelter. I think it helps to reprioritize our perspectives. And we just realized every human has the same needs. So I definitely have felt a lot of joy and peace in outdoor spaces and have felt welcome in, I think, every national park I've been to.
That's really nice to hear. Chris, as a park ranger, do you have another perspective to share?
In terms of like places we feel welcomed in, or just community wise?
Yeah, places that you feel welcome in, or even as your role, you know, as a park ranger, how do you make other people feel welcome and safe in these places?
Um, so yeah, basically in Haleakala, especially in Hawaii in general, um, we our state is so diverse that we really don't have um, you know, places where people are really racist towards one ethnicity or one nationality. And but yeah, for me at Haleakala, we've been able to make people feel welcome just by, you know, being coming in and approaching them with an open mind and a willing heart, basically just humbling ourselves, and because they're visitors, you know, and they're new to this place. A lot of the times it can be a culture shock. Hawaii is a very different place from the rest of the states, and the culture here is very much alive and well, and it's been thriving for the last few centuries, and especially in the last few decades, there's been a lot of movements in terms of Hawaiian culture and just more pride within the Hawaiian culture. And so, people, they come and they ask questions, and for us being able to, or not just able, but willing to answer those questions and share our culture with people, I really feel it does help folks feel welcomed, and not treating them like some random person that and being cocky about it, or just being just not welcoming, I guess. So not an easy way to explain it, but yeah. So it's just being humble about it.
It definitely resonates with me. I've been a park ranger for 14 years and I've worked in parks all across the country. And, there's times where you get a lot of repetitive questions like, where's the bathroom? It's not my favorite question to answer, but I know it is an absolute need for many, many people. And I wish bathrooms were easier to find in national parks and other places. But one of the things that I like to do when I think about, answering a question or talking to somebody who may be visiting for the first time is I try to treat them like I would my dad. And my dad always has a lot of questions. He's from Thailand, and he is also a jokester, so I have to pick up on that sarcasm. But I think about, how would I want a park ranger to treat my parents, if they were coming here, and my family, if they were visiting this place. And I try to do that on anybody who's visiting and sharing my knowledge or my experience with those places. So Joy, you hit a little bit on a topic, just talking about that almost like mental clarity that you get when you go into parks and you're able to kind of just let go and experience those places. So parks are sources where people, can seem like have a similar experience when it comes to wellness and mental health. But you're also a healthcare professional. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more on what's been successful in tying access to the outdoors and health for you.
Definitely. Thank you for that question. As you can see from what people put in the chat in terms of what comes to mind when they think about the outdoors and parks, so many people put peace. And these days, when issues of mental health are at the forefront, I think seeking peace and being able to find peace is so essential. I recently spent several weeks in New York City, where in a spot where it was pretty difficult to access any park space, any open space to speak of. And I saw the toll that it took on the people that lived there. It was hard to be outdoors in that part of New York, where you could have fresh air or be near trees, be in a natural area. So when you ask about health, definitely we know the impact of the outdoors on mental health. And I did a little search, and I saw there's actually been a lot of research studies on sounds in national parks, like natural sounds versus man-made sounds, and the impact on pain and depression, anxiety, stress, but also physical health. So one thing that I did in my career was when I was in New Mexico, working on the Navajo reservation, we had a cardiovascular risk reduction clinic where patients with high blood pressure and high cholesterol would be referred to us by doctors. And on average, within 6 months, our patients were able to reach their diabetes goals or their lipid goals and their blood pressure goals. And you would think maybe it was because we were starting new medications or increasing medications, but a huge component of what we were actually doing was counseling on lifestyle modifications, which means changes in diet and exercise. And on the reservations, it's not as easy to access certain forms of exercise, like gyms or equipment, but there were many other options for exercise for the outdoors, including horseback riding, including going out to play with your children, play with your family in outdoor spaces. So when you look at the body of evidence to address these very common, very prevalent disease states that Americans face, like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, the evidence is overwhelmingly showing that lifestyle modification, meaning exercise, is essential. When you see a medication for high blood pressure, for diabetes or cholesterol, it's always to be used in conjunction with lifestyle modifications. There is no pill that can completely replace the outdoors or physical activity. That's how I've seen parks tied to health. It's parks and the outdoors are just essential. You cannot make a pill to replace parks and the outdoors. Thanks for that question.
So Joy, if you were writing a prescription, a general prescription, which I know people don't do, but if you were to say, like, what is one thing that people can do in the outdoors, you know, that they can access pretty easily from anywhere, what would it be?
Well, there's a ton of options. Walking is great. I think there's just so many options, and it should be something that you enjoy. It can be spending time with your family, whether it's playing with the kids or taking a walk with family members. I think just about any sort of activity, gardening, there's a ton of different options, but it should be something that you enjoy.
Yeah, I like that you include a variety of outdoor activities. Hanako, you look like you have something that you'd like to add.
Yeah, so I would love to just jump off of what Joy was saying, you know, and add the other aspect of the mental health and well-being, kind of what I was alluding to earlier with, you know, a safe space to exist, right? And, you know, and I'm definitely going to focus more on like the historic sites aspects, but, you know, providing a space for people to convene, to learn about like their community's history, which is also part of our national history. So it isn't like, oh, this is just a Japanese American thing or Korean American thing or a Chinese American thing. That this is our history, right? So I think one thing that we could do is try to create, you know, these spaces where we could, you know, celebrate together, you know, some of these things, and then provide a space for healing. Because like what I said with Japanese American incarceration, you know, our government did this. It was our agency that did this. But then look at like Golden Spike, you know, that's the Transcontinental Railroad. You know, they just recently celebrated their sesquicentennial. But historically, in that image, there was no Chinese Americans or Asian Americans who are helping build the railroad. They weren't part of that story, right? And then so a couple of years ago, they redid it with the Chinese American community coming in, restaging that image and to show their participation in this historic event. And that, you know, helps with the healing and providing that safe space for communities to come. Over at Yosemite, they have the Chinese Laundry, and they're starting to do these annual pilgrimages there to get people to learn about, you know, how Chinese Americans were integral in, you know, the Yosemite kind of economy, right? So once we start looking inward, at our sites, you know, then we could be more inclusive, especially with, you know, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islander sites, where it's like, yeah, we have great natural resource sites, but let's talk about the culture and like, you know, what you guys are doing at Haleakala and Hawaii volcanoes. You know, we need to be more inclusive rather than just only focusing on natural resources. Let's focus collectively on the resources to tell these stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point that you're making there, Hanako. And you know, history, when we look back, there are a lot of, in US history, a lot of stories of white people, but not many other stories, and intriguing or interesting. And, you know, sometimes the hard stories that have happened with people of color and different ethnicities. Chris, you know, working in Kipahulu district of Haleakala National Park, you're also, you know, from that community as well. How do you discuss or share national parks or the significance of Haleakala when you're working there?
So when I do share it with this community, basically we don't really talk about its relation to the federal government, just depending on who I am talking to as well. And not to get too deep, but if anybody is familiar with the history of Hawaii, it was illegally annexed in 1898 and the kingdom was overthrown in 1893. So there's that historical barrier where people have bitter feelings towards anything and everything related to the federal government. And it's not everybody. It's Native Hawaiians in the community that are very, very passionate about what we have, like the sovereignty movement. We have something called the Aloha Aina movement, which is like, caring for our land, that kind of thing. And so when I talk about the national park with people in the community, I kind of approach it in a way where we're talking about this place is not a property of the federal government, but lands that our ancestors and our kupuna that they walked to, that they cultivated on, they lived on, and they were born and raised on. So, and we talk about like the future generations that have access to these places and all the uses that these parks can give to not just us but people who come after us. And yeah, and I approach with caution, and then if we start to get into some of the heavier things, we start talking about if we really get into this political stuff and the history, we just kind of tread lightly, and we approach it with, again, humility, and and having an open mind and just seeing it from both perspectives. But for myself, is in this community, we also like to serve as that bridge between the Native Hawaiian community and the federal government, and showing that we're all working towards the same goal, and we're all trying to perpetuate the culture as best we can. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chris. You talked about being that bridge between the federal government and Hawaiian community. What does your community think about you working for national parks and working on public lands?
Yeah, so the community, I'd say, would be divided. Some people are really, really happy for me because the federal government, to them means like a stable job, a really, a good pay, good benefits, and stuff like that. And then to some people, when they hear that I work for the national park, they immediately revert to the history and the clash between the federal government and Hawaiians and stuff. And so yeah, I'd say it's very divided, but most people are really supportive, and they're happy because again, we talk about what we can do for each other. And so yeah.
It sounds like it's a challenging role sometimes that you're navigating from the different viewpoints and experiences from people in the community or people who may be coming from outside of the community and hearing about these things for the first time. So the next question that I have, in thinking about community, and this is just for any of the panelists that would like to share, but what does your community think about you accessing national parks or public lands? What are their impressions? I know, Vivi, you've had a funny one, with the moniker, but what are people's reactions? Do they want to join you? Are they, interested, or do they think you're crazy? What are some of the reactions that you've come across?
I can go again. But I think from, people sort of poo-poo things that they don't know, right? And it takes a little time, a little bit more curiosity for people to kind of come around to like, so why are you really doing this? Friends, kind of kid around and come up to me like, are you hitting your midlife crisis? What is this? Why do you need to feel like you need to run off into the woods every weekend? That sort of thing. But, I would get texts and messages from my parents, when I did Angel's Landing. I love to live from, if there is a service, I love to live because I feel like I'm bringing my online community and friends into the space that I'm experiencing. Of course, it's through my iPhone lens, but that's as close as I can bring some of the friends that I have to these spaces. So it's people may think, you know, you're just trying to show off or whatnot, but I really think that in a way, you know, you're bringing somebody along with you on that journey, on that experience. And so as crazy as they think I am, I'm just gonna do it. And I do it smartly and I do it safely. And I show them that, you know, I have the right gears, I have the right safety equipment, and I'm prepared. You know, whether that means, you know, taking pictures, images of those tools, of those gears that I, you know, that I use to protect myself. And, you know, when I go on these things, I think it's just kind of educating in little doses and small bits over time is what you know, the people who, you know, they just kind of, they don't know what they don't know, and until somebody really exposed, you know, them to those experiences, you know, they eventually over the past 5 to 7 years, like I said, you know, I've brought a community along where I, when I started this journey, I was pretty much alone, and I didn't even know that I would find AAPI, you know, community members and friends who have similar interests that I did. So I think, you know, you just kind of have to be patient, be humble, just like Chris said, and, you know, give them as much information and, you know, kind of carrying them along with you.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess my comment would be like taking it from the recreation side to more the heritage tourism side of stuff. Because so just to give you guys a little background on me, I'm actually half Korean, half Japanese, and I probably more identify Korean because my mom's Korean, so I eat Korean food and everything. So recently, I've been exploring my Japanese American identity through my work, right? And within the park sites, so there are 6 sites that the Park Service manages that tells about the Japanese American incarceration history. And then 3 of them actually have these annual pilgrimages. So I'm what they call pilgrimage junkie. So I enjoy going to all these sites, you know, to access our public lands, right? But it's more for the heritage tourism, for that healing aspect, and for me to explore my identity in a safe space where I couldn't get that in Idaho because I was in a predominantly like, I guess what is known as a white-topia, where it's like 70% white, right? So I didn't get that interaction with this community. So as I started doing that, you know, exploring my Japanese American identity, I started meeting other people who are multi-race or ethnic, you know, that are maybe a quarter Japanese American, an eighth or whatnot. And I'm like, oh my gosh, have you guys ever gone on a pilgrimage? Let's go. So we kind of created this like small group of folks that will always go around to access the sites so we could learn more and engage with our cultural heritage, but also learning about the incarceration history, which I think is like really cool in one aspect. But then I guess to touch on another subject that I guess was the question for Chris about like, you know, how does the community view you, right? It's like, I think in one aspect, the Japanese American community, I do believe that, you know, they're happy that I'm there because it's like representation, right? But I do feel like there are some people within the community that still has that distrust because now it's like you're working for, again, the bureau that works under the agency that incarcerated us. So sometimes, you know, there are those dynamics too, but the way we could improve on that is through like targeted recruitment and hiring people that reflects the communities that we serve and also the communities that we are in, which may be 2 different things or 2 different communities, but understanding that for the inclusivity where people could see themselves reflected within the Ranger Springs.
Yeah, I think that inclusivity piece really hits home. When I think about the National Park Service and when I joined, you know, it was predominantly white and predominantly male in leadership roles. And even today, you know, the workforce, most recent study was done in 2020. 2.3% of the workforce in the National Park Service is Asian, whereas the US population is 5.9%. And we're not the only agency that suffers with that, but if we're not reflective, if our workforce isn't reflective of the communities that we're in, the people that we serve, it does make it hard to say that we're committed to telling these stories and making sure that other voices are heard in sharing those things. What about other panelists? What does your community think about you accessing the outdoors? What were their reactions or experiences?
I've also had a mix of reactions. I have spent a lot of time out west and met a lot of outdoorsy people. Maybe you could say the communities I had been in were predominantly white and somewhat affluent, and that's who you tend to see in the outdoors. But moving to the East Coast, I live in Maryland now, I have also found some Asian community that are interested in the outdoors, outdoor recreation. But I've also had some interesting comments said to me. I ran a couple marathons earlier in my life, and my parents told me, Joy, I think you're the first person in our whole family to run marathons. I've also been told, like, when I would invite Asian friends to outdoors activities, I've been told that Asian people are not athletic. I don't think I could hike that far. That's just not what I do. That's not what we do as Asian people. So also a mixed reception.
Do any of you other panelists have experiences, when it comes to that misconception or perception about, what it looks like to be somebody who can run marathons or, do some of these things outside? Does anybody have any experiences they'd like to share?
I'll go again where it's like, I remember when we moved to Idaho, the thing was to go camping. And so I remember, I think it's my sister and I were trying to convince our dad to take us camping. And so my mom's an immigrant from Korea and my dad is Japanese American. So after the war, he grew up super poor. So basically I first went to dad and my father was like, I grew up poor. We used to sleep on the floor all the time. We're not going to go camping, right? And then we went to mom and my mother's all like, no, we're not going to do that. She's like, this is why I have a job. So you guys can sleep in a bed. We're not going to go outdoors, get a tent and then camp. And I think some of it was from, our original interaction that we had that I kind of talked about earlier. But it's really interesting to see how it like completely shifted. And then we just never did it because my mom's like, this is why we're trying to give you a better life, which, I think that's why I didn't go camping until I think I was 22. It was after college. I went camping for the first time. So.
Chris, I saw a pretty big reaction to that. And Hanukkah said that it wasn't until later, college, that she actually went camping. What was your experience with the outdoors, and was it different than that?
I'm so sorry about that. I dropped my paper. But yeah, so my experience in the outdoors, yeah, I mean, my dad started work. He actually was working with the national park when he was under my age, and so that's when I also heard about it. And but in terms of just like camping and stuff, I started camping when I was really young. The first time I went camping, I must have been about 6 years old. We didn't really camp in national parks. But yeah, and I've been camping ever since. And now today, everybody enjoys vehicle camping. They call it overlanding. That's a really big thing I hear in the States. Here, we like to do a lot of fishing. So we camp on the shorelines and stuff. And so, yeah, I definitely also enjoy camping as well, but started very, very early when I was a kid.
Chris, in your experience, did you ever feel like you had barriers to the outdoors, or did you feel like it was pretty integrated in your everyday life?
I would say more integrated than most communities. So, especially for myself, I'm both Asian and Pacific Islander or Native Hawaiian, and but I mostly identify as Native Hawaiian. For myself, though, in this community, we really didn't have barriers in terms of accessing the outdoors. A lot of it was, we in Hawaiian culture we have this relationship with the land, and in a lot of Native cultures too. You take care of the land also takes care of you. But that was really instilled in us from a very, very young age. And so when I was a kid, we'd hop on our bikes, throw our fishing poles in our backpack with a 7-foot rod sticking out the top, and we'd, bike all the way down 6 miles to the ocean, down to town or Hana Bay or wherever. And we go fishing for the entire day. And so, or we would go up into the mountains and play in the forest, and so for us, there really was no barriers. And Hana is basically a jungle. If anyone's ever been to Maui, Maui is a very, very, or Hawaii in general is a very interesting place. But a lot of the times on the windward side, which is where Hana is located, it's very green, very lush, and very, very rural. So I live in a really small stretch of neighborhood, and we all have forests in our backyards. And so, yeah, honestly, we didn't really have barriers whatsoever. We just couldn't drive as children, but yeah.
That's wonderful to hear, like how integrated accessing the outdoors was for you, and even like the fishing component as well. It's an activity that you went out, and we talked a little bit about outdoor activities, some of the basics of just going out for a walk. But when we think about health and the outdoors, I'd just love to hear from the panelists, like what are some other recreational things that you like to do? I would also like to invite the audience, if you'd like to put in the chat some of the recreational opportunities that you enjoy being outdoors, whether it's for mental or physical health. What are your favorite go-to activities that you enjoy?
Well, I can start. I recently got married to a man who loves bike touring, and he's ridden across the country once, and we're going to try to do some cross-country riding this fall. I'm not going to say I'm going to ride across the entire country, but he's going to try to do that, and we're going to make that our honeymoon. But yeah, we've enjoyed a lot of different outdoors activities, like all the ones you've mentioned. There's just so many great opportunities. Doing yoga outdoors is something really nice too.
I can add a couple of activities that I've ventured into other than hiking, just because now I'm much more comfortable, being in the outdoors. I do some, I don't know if anybody has ever heard of Via Ferratas, which is the Iron Road. It's where you mountain climb, but there are rungs that are installed into the side of the mountain. And it's very safe because you're in a harness, and there's a 3-point harness system that you move as you climb the mountain. So I did this first time in West Virginia, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever done. I mean, it was because when you're climbing, you're sort of very just hyper focused on that, just the climb. But when you pan out and you look at how far you've climbed, it's pretty insane, and it's but it's pretty safe. So people look at it and think it's pretty extreme sports, but it's really not. So Joy, you and your husband should look that up, because I think you would totally enjoy that. And then of course, stand-up paddleboarding has been such a big hot trend, right? And I think I've did it in every single place that has it. I just came back from San Diego recently, and I did stand-up paddleboarding in San Diego. It's almost like a form of meditation for me, because you think it's physical, but it's actually pretty easy to do as long as you keep your try to keep your balance. And when you're out there, it's you and that paddleboard, and you're pretty much just meditating. It's the most peaceful thing I've done, in addition to hiking and via ferrataing.
I guess I'll just kind of jump off of you, where it's like the meditation part is the best. It's like just being out there, you know, whether you choose to walk a trail or not, or just get out of your car from the parking spot, I don't know, whatever. I think that that's really cool. But one of the things I'd love to do, so I used to work for the Navy in Naval Base Ventura County in Port Hueneme, California. And I would drive up to Channel Islands on the weekend, just take a book, get like, you know, get on the beach. And, you know, I won't go out to Channel Islands, but it's just right across from their visitor center to sit down, read a book for like 3 or 4 hours, listening to the waves come in, and then, you know, go home. And it helped me recharge. And then I got, you know, through a book, you know, or two a month. And it was just a really great way to kind of be in nature, listen, and then just, yeah, recharge and feel good.
Monica, that really resonates with me. You know, just finding a quiet spot and listening to water. And Joy even mentioned earlier that, you know, there's studies out there that show those natural sounds, you know, really help with our health as well. I know when I worked in Yosemite Valley on the weekends, you know, if I wasn't doing something physically exerting, sometimes I would just find a quiet spot by the river all by myself and read a book. And I would always feel, you know, recharged from that experience. You know, I've seen a lot of really great examples that people have been sharing in our chat here. Some echoing paddleboarding and sharing that interest as well. Trail running, cross-country skiing. Others just like taking in the sights and just being in nature in general. Forest bathing is one that I see. Birding. Being in the water, any kind of water, seems to refresh some people's souls. Finding hikes, biking outdoors, spending time with family, yoga, fishing, looking for wildflowers. It seems to be a place that a lot of people feel like they can go, and you know, just reading those things, I kind of just feel excited just saying those words, because I imagine what it feels like to be outdoors and doing those things. We chatted a little bit about you know, mental health and accessing outdoors. And I was curious to hear from any of our panelists, if you feel comfortable sharing, you know, was there a time in your life that maybe you went through a hard period or hard moment and you sought the outdoors for your mental health to really recharge? And is there an example of that that you can share where you turned to the outdoors?
I think for me, that's almost on a daily basis. So I feel like being outdoors is a huge source of mental health for me. It helps me to deal with stress. I think for a lot of people, it's a great way to manage stress. So I'm outdoors jogging or walking or hiking at least 3 times a week. But yeah, definitely at times where I have been under greater stress, definitely time outdoors would help to put things in perspective. And, you know, Hanako and Phoebe reminded me of some things you asked earlier about things we do outdoors, and you all mentioned meditation. And I think that type of thing is so important to be aware of, because yes, you can go outdoors on a hike with a lot of people, but being outdoors alone, I do feel like I'm able to reflect upon my own life and to see clearer. So and also just enjoy creation, and when you're in a place where you're the only human and you realize how big the outdoors are, it puts things in perspective. It just helps you realize that there's something way bigger out there. And I think that's a great place to reflect and think about what is important in your life. Anyway, I went off the subject, but thank you.
I'll add to Joy's. So, you know, and I seek the outdoor in earnest as a just a lifestyle. You know, in the last 7 years, but before that, when I started my family, I have 2 sons, one of which during in his element, like maybe first or second grade, had a lot of issues that I was at the time working full-time at ExxonMobil. I was attending Georgetown for my undergrad, and I had a baby. So, and my son was having issues at school where you know, he couldn't control his temper. And I went through sort of a period of almost a mental breakdown because I had way too much to handle. And every time the phone rings that I could tell was from the school, I could feel the numbness from the tip of my head, and it just moves like physically down to the tip of my toes. And I would drive to Shenandoah National Park on, you know, a Saturday morning, and I would go, and I remember I still have the book, and it was all the waterfalls in in Shenandoah. And that this was early, you know, probably 20 years ago, that I sought nature in order to sort of stabilize and find some equilibrium in my life. So I think it was always there, my love for nature and seeking out nature in order to um, regain some balance. But that was a very sort of turbulent and chaotic time in my life that I sought nature in order to kind of work through how do I help my son? How do I, you know, carry my load as an employee and as a student, and be able to fulfill all of those roles? And, you know, I think if it wasn't for seeking, you know, the outdoors and finding something to give me that balance, you know, I may have gone through, you know, some much more severe and worse medical, you know, issues that, you know, who knew if I could overcome it on my own, you know, without medication or medical help.
Thank you for sharing your experience. Hanako, go ahead.
Yeah. So I recently went through like a huge hardship in August where I almost wanted to quit the Park Service. And I was trying to find, you know, my space in the Park Service. So like going back to, you know, Minidoka National Historic Site to just try to find like the purpose of why am I doing what I'm doing? Because I was just struggling, and some of it, it wasn't like over, like, I think it's a whole bunch of implicit bias. I don't think that people are just trying to be jerks about it. They just didn't know it's huge blind spot. But it was really hard for me to deal with it. And so I basically went on leave for 3 weeks. And part of that time I ended up going to Yosemite, and I went out to Olmsted Point, I think it is, and just like sat out there for like, do you guys know the golden hour where it's like the sun comes down at this certain moment and everything is just so beautiful? And I would just like sit out there, just like, what am I doing? You know, is it worth it? Is it worth fighting? Is it worth like being part of, you know, this huge agency that's kind of hard to shift the culture, right? And then I went down to Golden Gate, hung out with my friend over at the Presidio, and then I was supposed to go over to Cesar Chavez, but that didn't pan out, and I went up to Manzanar National Historic Site where my family was incarcerated during World War II. And then I came back home, and you know, that helped me kind of process some stuff, but also, you know, find the camaraderie of other rangers who were kind of in similar situations or different, and just talking to other, you know, rangers of color was super helpful as well, to kind of get me out of that really like negative spot. And it really helped me out, because it's like, I'm glad I didn't leave. You know, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done within the Park Service, but it helped me find the strength needed to continue on, to be like, yeah, I want to hold, you know, our agency and our bureau accountable so we could be the best version of ourselves for future generations, right? And yeah, so that trip was very, very helpful for me. And I think I needed to do more of that, just as a way just to reconnect for my own like personal mission, but to understand also the Park Service mission. So then it's all realigned. It's like one of those things where you just have to, you know, recalibrate every once in a while.
Yeah, I think that recalibration, is something that many people can relate to. And it's interesting to hear some of your different experiences that everybody has shared so far, about seeking out those places and being able to do so. One of the things that you mentioned, Hanako, is finding support in the community and other people that you might know in the National Park Service or in your network that are people of color that may be dealing with some of the same issues as you. And one of the emerging questions that we had with our participants, our attendees for this panel today, when we surveyed them as they were signing up, was, how can I support the AAPI community? Especially if you're not from the AAPI community, how can you understand or be supportive or be a better ally? And for our panelists, maybe we can start with Hanako. What are ways to be a good ally for the AAPI community, especially if you're not from that community?
Yeah, I think some of it kind of goes back to what Chris is saying. It's like come in with an open heart and open mind with the humility and respect to want to learn, right? And then once, if we're sharing what we're learning with you or what we experience, make sure that you're just not taking it for granted. It's like, if it's something that needs to change, tell people. Like, if you're learning about the Japanese American incarceration history for the first time, you're like, holy cow, our government did this, where, this happened, it's really messed up. It's like, share it, but then also know like when to create space, right? Because it's like, I've been recently in a few meetings that were supposed to be a safe space to talk about stuff. And then there are some folks who are identifying as allies who are taking up a lot of space where they're like, teach me about racism. And it's all like, do your work, this is emotionally exhausting for people. It takes a lot of energy, to help people go through this. So if you could do some of your homework and then, ask people if they have the space and time and the mental energy to give to you, then that's fine. And then when they're giving that to you, just, always thank them, because they don't have to do this, right? So I think that to me is the allyship that's needed. Is just that humility of going in, of understanding when to create the space, but also understanding when to advocate and then also amplify messages. Because I've been in meetings where I would say something, it's completely ignored until one of my white colleagues would amplify my message. And then they're like, oh, so-and-so, that's a great idea. And then they'll be like, no, Hanako said this about 10 minutes ago, and that's what being an ally is to be like, hey, I notice that someone is not being heard. It's a good idea. Let's try to find a space to reintroduce it.
I can echo what Hanako said and amplify that. Yes, definitely be humble and open-minded and listen. And those of you that are on the call, you're doing exactly the right thing, listening to people's various experiences and discuss. You can ask your colleagues, ask your friends what their experiences have been, but that can be exhausting for them. So be aware of all the resources that are at your fingertips online. I think George Floyd's recent trial actually brought to light the grief that a lot of us have. I think we have to realize that we have a problem with racism in the United States. I've come across some people who say, well, I'm not racist. So in a way, they're saying this is not my problem. But I think with George Floyd's trial, a lot of us were, our eyes were opened and we realized we have to stand up for something. We have to acknowledge that we have a problem in the United States. And there is a saying that is something like, for evil men to succeed, all that needs to happen is for good men to do nothing. So those of us that are not necessarily experiencing racism or feeling racist ourselves, we need to be aware that there is a problem, listen to other people's experiences, and stand up for inequity wherever you see it. And that might be when you see someone of a different culture or race being mistreated or marginalized, or it could even be if you're in an office that's predominantly one culture or one gender, if you see someone being excluded, speak up for that person. And some smaller examples would be, for example, if you hear someone's name being mispronounced, just privately and kindly correct the mispronunciation, or ask them to clarify that mispronunciation. And then on a larger level, if you see any type of violence or hatred obviously taking place, to stand up against that. And it's just amazing to me on the news when I see bystanders not doing anything with these recent events of Asian hatred, of hatred towards Asian people. So I think allyship involves listening, discussing, and also standing up for what is right. Thank you.
I'd like to add and echo that those sentiments, and I feel like that's something that is very near and dear to my heart. Recently, I gave a keynote to Arlington County workforce. They also have an AAPI Heritage Proclamation Day. And the practical steps that I outlined, in that speech was, if you haven't heard of Hollaback, I think they've been, very out there recently. To sign up for their bystander intervention training, it's free. I attended it recently. It's online, and there were over 5,000 people, and not just from the U.S. but internationally, was on this bystander intervention webinar with me. So it was very. You felt like there are people who care, right? So take advantage of, they have 3 free training on Hollaback. So the website is called I'll type it into the chat room. But it goes through the 5 steps of intervention, the 5 Ds, and they call it, let's see, direct, distract, delegate, document, and delay. And they go through, scenario by scenario with each of those steps. So those were very concrete things that, as somebody who wants to support and stand up, for racism, I think it could be used in any kind of situation. The second one is to check in with your Asian, peers, Asian American peers, when, just to let them know that there are people who care. A lot of people who are the Asian American AAPI community members who have been attacked, one of the things that they cite as being even almost traumatic as the attack themselves is that, nobody stood up for them. That nobody, intervened, and nobody tried to stop, or even, show, even post attack, that, they cared. So that is something that I think anybody who wants to be an ally can easily do. Step 3, to advocate for, awareness in your workplace, or whatever networks or entities that you belong to, be a strong advocate for awareness. And then, reach out to your elected officials. I think a lot of our AAPI community members don't know and don't use the voice that they have through, the elected officials, the local and the state officials that, I think I work closely with those members of the of elected officials, and I know that they care and they do listen. So I think anybody who wants to be an ally, and even AAPI members, community members ourselves, could do a better job at making sure our voice is heard. And then finally, just to be involved in as many of the celebrations, and as Hanukkah talked about earlier, to feel like to feel and act like we belong and we celebrate our cultural heritage, and bring that into every space and the public arena, so that people can appreciate and be familiar with it, to the extent that, they want to be involved. So those are sort of like the 5 steps that I outline as far as practical, steps that people can be an ally to the AAPI community.
Is there anything else anyone would like to add?
I'll just throw in a real short one. But yeah, so basically a really good way to be supportive is just to be there and do your homework. If you don't know about the challenges and the issues that these communities are facing, whether that be Asian, Pacific Islander, or Native Hawaiian, just do your homework, get educated on it, and try to understand why they're facing these challenges and why they feel the way they feel, and then try to empathize with them and just be understanding, and then just being that ear, or just someone for them to talk to, about it, and be supportive in whatever way you can be. And yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Joy. Did you have something?
Oh,
you'd like to...
yes, I'd like to add to what Chris just said. I agree that we need to become more aware and literate in the area of inequities, and especially in the area of public health. And I see some of my colleagues are in this meeting. And I know this meeting is called the Power of Parks for Health. And we need to be aware that we do have inequities in access to healthcare, housing, parks, education in our whole country. And it becomes a public health issue. We know that these social determinants of health play a large role. Marginalization has a huge impact on people. And even as a scientist or a healthcare practitioner, we need to become more aware and literate in the area of inequities. When we, as public health practitioners, we are here to address areas of need in healthcare in the United States, and it's becoming more and more apparent that race is a huge source of inequities. And when a nation's citizens are disadvantaged by racism, whether it be one group or another, it cripples our entire country. Our whole nation is disadvantaged and damaged. So we are such a wealthy nation. We are very rich, and our national parks and natural areas are some of our greatest treasures. And we need to look carefully at this partnership between the Public Health Service and National Park Service to find out how can we use these great tools to further improve healing in our country and improve health. So thanks, Chris, for reminding me of those things.
Yeah, and I just wanted to drop a link in here. So there's a presidential, is it a proclamation or a memo? It's a memo that's condemning and combating racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States. And Health and Human Services, I do believe that they're creating a task force to kind of go through and look at some of basically the institutionalized racist policies that exist and try to eliminate it out of some of the federal service. And some of it's only specifically pertaining to COVID, but it gives me like a thought where, we should be kind of looking in, into our agencies to see, hey, where are there historical or, institutionalized racist policies that exist that's preventing us from moving forward? Because some of it is just like antiquated from like, the 1900s, and state laws and whatnot. But then it could be like these lingering dingleberries, sorry, maybe I shouldn't use that word, but within our system that we should go and try to cull out so we could create a more equitable system, whether it is, with the health aspects or park service and access to public lands. But there's so much room for us to grow. And, looking at some of these policies that are coming out, it's really interesting to see what our future is going to hold for us. But it's good to see that there's other things going on.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, a lot of good discussion on, supporting the AAPI community, educating yourselves and taking that on. You know, I think one of the comments that we have from Virginia in the chat is, you know, I do agree on people of other backgrounds should take a advocacy role for AAPI communities. For instance, the often sole Asian in the group should not be the only person having to explain AAPI issues. You're right that we have to speak up when other minority groups are mistreated and misunderstood. And, you know, just from my own personal experience, you know, I had dealt with this really recent, right as this roundtable was forming. And I was featured along with 2 other female park rangers in the National Park Service in a major publication. And I was really proud to share my story. And then I looked on social media and I saw that this major publication had not monitored any of their comments. And I was really vulnerable sharing my experiences. And I was really hurt by some of the racist and xenophobic comments that I was met with. And I was also surprised because I shared with a few friends and friends who are not of the AAPI community. And right away they had my back and they were reporting the comments, they were putting themselves on the line, they were challenging some of the viewpoints people had faced. And I think that goes to say, you know, it shouldn't be the only Asian American or Pacific Islander that's out there saying, hey, like what you're doing right now, it's wrong, because they put themselves on the line all the time as minorities. You know, if you come from a more privileged background, you know, step up and say something. We have just a couple minutes left. And our audience, you know, I think we have maybe time for like one question. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask our panelists, please go ahead and put it in the chat. I might just choose one just for the sake of time. But any questions either for an individual panelist or for the group as a whole, and someone can chime in.
As we're waiting for that question, can I at least respond to your incident, Jen? Because it's like, yeah. You know, I haven't had like the personal aspect, but I know our park, well, when I was at Minidoka National Historic Site, the park was featured on the NPS like at large Facebook page. And I started to monitor some of the comments and I was starting to respond, but then this is the thing where, you know, everyone, well, it was recommended that we shouldn't be responding to these trolls. But to me, I'm like, if it goes unanswered, it looks like then we're not saying anything. So again, this kind of goes back to like, we need to hold then our bureau accountable or whoever is monitoring it accountable, because when stuff like that happens, like just because it's like, oh, we don't want to engage, you know, these trolls doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, they see it, I'm a troll, they're not engaging. They see it as, oh, I'm right because no one's saying anything. So that's another issue that I think we need to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, from my personal experience, I was really disappointed in that publication for not stepping up, you know, right away and saying, hey, what you're saying is wrong. You know, they deleted the comment and it almost was worse that they deleted it rather than saying something. So I think, you know, using your voices goes a long way. And as we round out towards the end here, one of the questions that we have from somebody in the audience from Lucy is, you know, thank you for sharing your experiences. What would you say to those who don't feel like they belong in spaces, or how can we empower these people? Or how can younger people create a path for the future?
Well, I guess I'll start off, is that we need to mentor the next generation. And a lot of this goes with recruitment. Then it's retention, you know, and trying to find a path for them. Because, you know, I didn't know about a career in the Park Service. I was kind of encouraged by a person in region who happens to be Japanese American to say, hey, you should apply for this job. But because I didn't see people like me reflected at the park that I eventually wanted to work at, I saw no future for me. And so, you know, trying to do like targeted recruitment to get people, you know, whether it's like ethnic diversity or, you know, urban versus rural or socioeconomics, we need to be able to actually do real recruitment, not like go on USA Jobs, because that's recruitment. That's not recruitment. Because there's so many barriers there where it's like you have to have, you know, be able to do the two-step verification and whatnot. So it's trying to teach people how to just apply on USA Jobs 101. But a lot of it, I think it goes to that.
I'd like to add to Hanako's comments in that I think we all occupy different, different spaces in our professional and our personal lives that um, if we, bring these conversations into those spaces in a safe and a neutral, from a place of humility and curiosity. I think, I have two young adults in my home, and they bring with them a lot of their friends and, their own peers that, we have these types of conversations. A lot of my son's friends are Filipinos or Hispanics or Latinx, and, all walks of life. And I love that because in the community in where I live, we have a very diverse population. But with some of those younger generations, I think, we as adults, um, I bring my professional life, I bring, the hobbies, and I've taken them on my hikes. As a matter of fact, Jen, I think, Old Rag, right, in Shenandoah National Park. I took them, these are gym rats, young adults, 18 to 21, 22-year-olds, and I kicked their butts. I mean, they just, they loved it. They felt challenged, but they were also exposed to, the outdoors in the sense that they would never experience within, doing it in a gym, right? So I make it fun for them. I challenge them, bring, bribe them with food, bribe them with, after our hike, we're gonna go and have Korean, all you can eat but Korean barbecue, and you know how much they love that. So, I try to kind of like combine the things that I love and the things that they love in order to kind of bridge that generation gap. And, that's how I tend to bring those conversations about, George Floyd or the verdicts or what's going on with, Asian, what do they think about the Atlanta shooting down, on, I think it was March 21st. So all of those things, I think at this point, in time, API community is in a crisis, and we need to, leverage the opportunity to make sure that, we talk about it, but do it in a way that is safe and it's not antagonistic, and in order to get people to kind of, see what's happening right now. So thank you.
So as we draw our conversation to a close, any last piece of advice for anyone from the Asian Pacific Island community for accessing outdoors for health or recreation or whatever, maybe that Chris or Joy, if you want to close us out with the last comment, and any advice that you would give to somebody in the AAPI community accessing the outdoors.
My only suggestion would be to invite them along with you, to create that safe space for them and to see how welcoming the parks are. Go ahead, Chris.
And yeah, I say just get out there and enjoy what's yours. These parks and all these spaces are given to us. They're gifts, and it's our right to go ahead and enjoy these spaces. So yeah, don't be afraid. Just do it.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists today, Hanako, Joy, Bibi, and Chris. Really appreciate the dynamic conversation that we've had today. And thank you to our participants and attendees for investing your time with us today to hear these stories. And a final thanks to the National Park Service and the National Environmental Education Foundation for sponsoring tonight's event. A recorded version of this roundtable will be made available on the National Park Service Health and Safety page under the tab Power of Parks Roundtable. This information and additional resources will also be provided to you in a follow-up email from this discussion. For updates about future roundtables and for more information about the Power of Parks for Health initiatives, follow NPS Healthy Parks, Healthy People on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Thank you everyone for participating today and sharing your stories and coming with open minds. Mahalo.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It was great.